Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the continent's most industrialised nation's hit by its second recession in 2 years. The foundation of South Africa's problems lie with the sputtering national energy supplier. Also, since the start of February, motorcycle and tricycle taxis known as Okada and KK have been banned in Lagos, stalling the livelihoods of both legitimate and unlicensed drivers in a notoriously traffic-snarled city. And I speak to South African design prodigy Thebe Magugu. The 26-year-old wowed LVMH judges last year to win one of the world's most coveted fashion prizes. He's now exhibiting his creations at his first Paris Fashion Week. But first, South Africa has been hit with its second recession in as many years. The contraction's been largely blamed on the struggle to keep the lights on in the country as President Cyril Ramaphosa races to restructure the beleaguered national power supplier, Eskom. The country's economic sluggishness has been made worse by the global fallout from the coronavirus outbreak, which has had an impact on economic activity worldwide. Ramaphosa said that the poor growth has not come as a surprise, but nevertheless, it does heap pressure on the government to make good on its pledges to turn the country's fortunes around. Jane Flanagan joins me now with more. Jane, so obviously the foundations for these results were laid well before the global coronavirus slowdown. Any likelihood that things could be in for an uptick anytime soon?
Hi, Georgia. No, I don't think there is at all. As you mentioned, it's the rolling power cuts that have really put paid to the South African economy, and nobody in the country is spared. The malls fall dark, the restaurants are empty, businesses are suffering, and the mines are closed. And from one day to the next, we simply don't know if the lights are going to stay on and for how long. And so against this backdrop is incredible unpredictability and makes overseas investors very jittery. As you say, the numbers we received today predate the coronavirus outbreak. So when we begin to feel the impact of that, I can't think there's going to be any good news coming for South Africa. China is South Africa's biggest buyer of its exports and also the biggest supplier of its imports. So the two economies really are very codependent. We have 95,000 tourists a year from China and import 85% of our phones from China. So we're totally reliant on it. And at the end of the month, we're waiting to hear what Moody's, the ratings agency, have to say about South Africa's sovereign debt. At the moment, it's the only ratings agency that has yet to downgrade the debt to junk status. And if they do rule against South Africa's debt later this month, then it's going to be more bad news heaped on Cyril Ramaphosa.
So where does all this leave President Ramaphosa's reform agenda?
Well, last week we had the budget. Tito Mboweni, the finance minister's budget, was tipped as the most significant delivered since the end of apartheid in 1994. And he warned the country that the only way to turn fortunes around was some serious belt tightening. The wage bill for the public sector is vast in South Africa. The number of civil servants has really ramped up over the last decade or so, and they've all enjoyed inflation-busting pay rises. And he said that had to stop. But in order to take on the union, Cyril Ramaphosa really is setting himself up for a very big fight with the union chiefs, the very people who brought him to power. But definitely reformers say that's the only way. Serious reform of the state-owned enterprises such as Eskom that are really dragging the country's economy down and really trimming some of the fat from these wage bills is the only way that he's going to make any inroads. But in doing that, he's really setting himself up for a big clash with the union bosses.
Thanks very much. Jane Flanagan there for us in Cape Town. Now, DRC's last Ebola patient was released from hospital with much fanfare on Tuesday. It marks the first time that the country's officially been without an active case since August 2018, when its most recent outbreak began. Since then, more than 2,264 people have died. Tuesday marked 2 weeks since any new cases were announced. It is now in for a tense wait to pass the 42 days needed to officially declare the recent epidemic over. Now, since the start of February, motorcycle and tricycle taxis known as Okada and KK have been banned in Lagos. It has had a huge impact on drivers who, until recently, made a living getting people around the notoriously dense traffic of the Nigerian city. Our correspondent reports.
Bosa should be the owner of the tricycle after paying off a year of installments. She made a daily deposit of 3,000 naira, nearly €8 to the owner. The recent enforcement of a ban on major Lagos roads has ruined her plans.
They say they want to ban the tricycle operator, but they know what they're doing. They're deliberately putting a strain on us. They want us to suffer.
According to the Lagos state government, tricycle and commercial motorcycles don't respect rules. They are blamed for about 10,000 accidents between 2016 to 2019. These motorcyclists find customers via mobile app and are considered legal workers. They follow the rules, they use helmets, carry one passenger at a time, and operate with a license. But they too are affected by the ban.
If they caution us on how we drive, how we speed, on all these things, we cannot be able to amend ourselves. It's not to the extent of banning Okada or Marwa.
Since the ban came into force, Bose has stopped working. The tricycle owner has asked her to return it. Lagos State is encouraging people to use buses to get around as part of the government's attempt to change the image of the metropolis.
We were putting adverts in newspapers, we were talking on radio and putting jingles on radio and telling these people what to do, but they are just hard of hearing. As far as they are concerned, there must be no law, there must be no order. And no government will look at that kind of situation and say, because people want to get from point A to point B, it's not going to enforce the law.
Lagosians have gone way past the surprise of the ban of the use of the bike, popularly known as Okada, and the tricycle in the metropolis. And they are getting used to different ways of getting to their destinations, which involves trekking for some distance.
Now, last year's winner of the coveted LVMH prize for young fashion designers was, for the first time, won by an African. South Africa's Thebe Magugu wowed judges and the world with his creations, and since, awareness of his work has gone from strength to strength. This week, he was in the French capital for the first showing of his autumn-winter collection for Paris Fashion Week. The 26-year-old says that the story of his work is rooted in the people he grew up with. I caught up with him earlier at his showcase at the Palais de Tokyo. This is what he had to say.
I think when people think of Africa, they think of like this one-dimensional sort of thing, especially in fashion. They tend to think it's just like a generic print or, you know, a certain silhouette. I just wanted to present my vision of Africa. So the exhibition is called Epopeng Extension, which is the name of the township where I'm from. And Epopeng in English translates as beautify yourself. And basically went back home and photographed the people, cousins, friends who sort of raised me. My cousins, my mom's house, my uncle on a motorbike, people who serve as really my earliest references, really. I grew up with such powerful, strong, independent, headstrong women from, you know, my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, and seeing how they sort of navigated their lives through, you know, through the good and the bad was really, really inspiring, and that's why I wanted to create clothes for that type of women.
And how have they reacted to your success?
My mom, she's very proud. She's very happy, but she says every time I come home, I have to bring her samples that she can dress up in. She's very happy.
There was a lot made of the fact that you were the first African to win the LVMH prize last year. How has that changed the way that you work?
The most important thing for me has been the mentorship program that comes with winning the prize, sort of carried out by the execs at LVMH, and for the next 12 months, they basically said, you know, their books are open for me to access, you know, and it's people who help across sourcing, intellectual property, suggestions for production, you know, things that are invaluable for any designer, I think, whether you're emerging or established.
And do you think that makes a difference for perhaps more exposure for future African designers going forward?
I definitely think so. You know, I always say, like, if they manage to find me, and, you know, I think that shows you that there's so many more.
Do you think much is changing in terms of diversity in some of the more traditional international big fashion houses?
I think it is changing. It sort of has to, you know, because what I always say is that people really need to realize that, you know, with all the controversies that have happened the past few months with, like, big brands sort of releasing racist imagery, and, you know, some of them argue it was unintentional, I think that is combated by just getting a more diverse staff. You know, I think if there was someone who wasn't, how do I say, if in the meeting they would have about a certain campaign, if there was more than one voice or a more diverse set of people in that meeting, I think someone would have picked up their hands and be like, that's actually, you know, that's maybe not the best way to do that, because in our sort of community, that brings up a lot of pain. What happens next? I really just want to focus on building this global brand that has, you know, a footing all over the world, but based in South Africa, you know, that really creates jobs and sort of contributes in its way to, like, the economy from back home, you know, because I just don't want to contribute to the brain drain that Africa is going through, and I really want to just be there with my peers to sort of just figure it all out, you know.
Thebe Magugu there speaking to me at the Palais de Tokyo. Well, that's it for Eye in Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.